Today, let's break down the Ruy Lopez Berlin defense and learn how to turn it into an active, winning strategy. Let's get into it. We begin by playing pawn to e4. Black responds with pawn to e5. Now, we continue with knight to f3, attacking the e5 pawn. Black plays knight to c6, defending the pawn. A very standard response. Next, we play bishop to b5. This move serves a couple of key purposes. First, it allows us to castle kingside, which we will do in nearly every variation. Second, it puts pressure on black's knight on c6, which in turn weakens their e5 pawn significantly. Let's now explore the move knight to f6, known as the Berlin defense, often criticized for being dry or drawish. However, I've discovered a very exciting and aggressive way to play against it that remains objectively strong. We begin by castling kingside, inviting black to capture the pawn on e4. But instead of playing rook to e1 right away, we strike in the center with pawn to d4, attacking multiple pieces. If black captures the d4 pawn, the e-file opens up. We'll examine this variation shortly. But first, let's consider the more common response. Knight retreats to d6. Traditionally, this leads to a well-known drawing line after an exchange. However, we deviate with the brilliant and unexpected pawn takes on e5. At first glance, this may seem questionable since black can now capture our bishop and be up a piece. But here's the trick. Their knight on d6 becomes completely trapped with no viable escape squares. This gives us a tempo advantage, which we can exploit. Eventually, we will play pawn to a4, putting direct pressure on the knight and winning it back. Before doing that, we play bishop to g5, attacking the queen. The best defense for black is bishop to e7, blocking the threat. We then exchange bishops. Black recaptures with their queen. Now, although it may look like there is a potential threat from black, it's not dangerous. We calmly play pawn to a4, attacking the trapped knight and regaining control of the position. Now, as a last-ditch effort, black brings their knight to d4, placing it in the center. At this point, we simply capture the knight. Now things can get interesting. First, if black tries to recapture the pawn on e5 with their knight, they are actually already in serious trouble. We respond with pawn to f4, attacking their knight. The key idea is that once the knight retreats, the e-file is now open, and we strike with rook to e1. This creates a powerful pin, and black is completely lost. They cannot escape the pressure. So what else can black try? They might attempt to castle kingside, trying to get to safety. In that case, we have a very exciting line. We play knight to b5, immediately threatening knight to c7, forking their king and rook. Black often responds with a seemingly clever move. Queen captures on e5. Almost everyone plays this, thinking they are both defending and winning a pawn. But things are not as simple as they appear. We now strike with rook to e1, attacking their queen. The only real way for black to maintain pressure is to not defend, but instead counterattack with queen captures on b2, going after our rook. We continue with knight to c3, developing and defending simultaneously. And even though black is technically up 2 pawns, we are actually better here. Why? Because if black plays carelessly, for example, pawn to d6, we can play rook to b1, and suddenly black's queen is completely trapped. That would be a beautiful tactical win for us. So instead, the only real move black has here is queen to b4, trying to evacuate the queen and get it out of danger. At this point, we play knight to d5, bringing our 2 knights together. Now c7 is under massive pressure and will almost certainly fall. Black usually retreats the queen to a5 here, and then we strike with knight captures on c7. Even though black is technically up a pawn, we're clearly dominating. Our knights are active, and black has no way to challenge them, making it a lasting problem. Their best try is to trade our knight and castle kingside. We recapture with the queen and play knight to c3, gaining space and easier development. Their only decent move is pawn to d6, trying to activate their light-squared bishop, but even that fails. It ends up costing them a pawn. Here's how. We play pawn captures on d6, they respond queen captures on d6, then queen captures queen, pawn captures queen, and now we play rook from a1 to d1. The d6 pawn is now under pressure and cannot be defended effectively. Black might try to defend with a rook for a single move, but then we continue with knight to b5. If they try to push the pawn, we respond with knight to c7, and it becomes a disaster. In the end, you enter a pawn-up endgame with significantly better activity and real chances to convert it into a win. Let's back up for a moment. There are a few other options black can try in this position. Instead of retreating the knight to attack our bishop, they might choose to capture our pawn on d4. In response, we play rook to e1, pinning their knight to the king. A very problematic situation for black. Now they have only 2 realistic defenses: pawn to d5 or pawn to f5. Pawn to f5 is the weaker of the two. We now play queen captures on d4, and the key idea is that knight to f3 is coming next, adding pressure to the pinned knight, and black has no good way to stop it. The best they can do is knight captures on d4, we recapture, and then they play pawn to c6, hitting our bishop, but we simply play pawn to f3, allowing the exchange. After the trades, even if black is technically up a pawn, their structure is a mess, and we're ready to launch a powerful attack. If they get greedy and play rook captures on e4, they're already losing. The position is extremely sharp, and we have far better development and activity. Now, if black tries the other defense, pawn to d5, it's a bit more solid, but we still continue with knight captures on d4, followed by pawn to f3. Here, we also introduce an extra threat. Knight captures on c6, followed by a fork, which makes things even worse for black. In both cases, we're pressing hard, and they're walking on a tightrope. In 95% of cases, this will be an easy win, but for thoroughness, there's one tricky line to know. Black plays bishop to d6, you respond with knight captures on c6, and then they go bishop captures on h2. There's only one winning path here. Play king to h1, then after queen to h4, continue with rook captures on e4 check. After pawn recaptures, play queen to d8 check, forcing a trade. You enter a pawn down endgame, but you're actually better. Black's king is stuck in the center, e4 pawn is weak, and your development is smoother. Now let's rewind to the position after bishop to g5, attacking the queen. Instead of bishop to e7, black might try pawn to f6. You capture, they recapture, and now you play a check. From here, two common branches. If they play bishop to e7, you respond with pawn captures on f6, exploiting the pin, and you're already winning. If they play king to f7, which is surprisingly solid, you play queen to d5 check, and their king moves to g7, and we continue the attack from there. Now, back up your bishop to d2. Things get wild here. Black's knight retreats to d6, and even though you're down a piece, queen to h5 gives you a slight edge. You're setting up a big attack. Queen to h6 or g4 check, knight swings from h4 to f5, and the rook lifts via e3 to g3, or even drops into e8 in some lines. It's a powerful attacking setup. Now let's go back. If black plays bishop to c5 instead, that's likely their worst option. You respond with knight captures on e5, and after they recapture. Now we play pawn to d4, forking the center. The most common response is pawn captures on d4, and we recapture. Then their knight drops back, we trade off, and continue with knight to c3. It's not too complex. We simply have more space, smoother development, and better piece coordination. From here, we can also go bishop to g5, pinning their knight, followed by pawn to e5, adding pressure. We're in a very comfortable position. Another line they might try is pawn to d6, the Steinitz defense. Here, we go rook to e1 to support our center, and after bishop to d7, we play pawn to c3, aiming for the central d4 break. This also allows our bishop to reposition to c2 or b3, both strong options, though I prefer c2. Usually, black will just continue with bishop to e7 to finish development and prepare to castle, but their position is extremely cramped. We respond with pawn to d4, striking the center again. After they castle, we retreat our bishop to a4, maintaining pressure. From here, good follow-up ideas include pawn to h3, preventing their bishop from pinning our knight on g4, and rotating our knight from d2 to f1 to g3, building pressure. We're clearly ahead in space and activity. If black ever captures in the center, we recapture with a pawn and gain full central control. A huge advantage. Lastly, let's quickly look at one more try by black. Pawn to a6, attacking our bishop. We capture, they recapture, and now we strike with knight takes on e5. Normally, this might fail to queen to d4, forking our knight and pawn, but here we can simply retreat the knight. If queen takes on e4, we reply rook to e1, pinning the queen. They may also try knight captures on e4, but again, rook to e1 puts them in big trouble. In both cases, we're pressing and their position is falling apart.